Welcome to the Business of Health. I'm Gisele Wertheim Aymes from the world of longevity, and we are hosted on the Nielsen Network. I am looking forward to speaking to the founder of LifeQ, Laurence Olivier. Laurence founded a company along with some other investors that has gone global in the last 2 years. So it started in South Africa, a couple of health techies who looked at how they could explore biometrics for health and longevity. Now, biometrics is basically, very in simple terms, it's about measuring the body and all the different mechanisms in the body. So, for example, your oxygen levels in your blood could be monitored by technology. I mean, that's pretty incredible. They could even now, and I think Laurence will explain it to us, they can even start measuring whether you have got the early signs of COVID-19 long before your body actually tells you it's got COVID-19. Literally in the last 2 weeks, this company and their investors have done this massive deal. It's $47 million investment by funders overseas into this company, which is really going to take it to the next level. LifeQ. I know you started out in South Africa in Stellenbosch. You are now a global organization. You have offices in Europe and I know in the US, and you've done this incredible deal now, this $47 million investment that you'll share more about. But can you just tell us about how it all started?
I had the pleasure to meet two PhDs from Stellenbosch in 2009, actually at a biotechnology business plan competition. What was quite interesting for me when meeting my two co-founders, both PhDs in computational systems biology. Now I have to say that word because it's very fundamental to us, that we are sort of like biology driven and systems driven. So I met them at this competition. They presented some device which didn't win the competition. And I was actually a judge. And being a judge, I actually had the pleasure of meeting some of these most interesting, technologists and entrepreneurs. And I met both Franco and Rian there. And at the end of the ceremony, I actually told them, well, even though you didn't win, the competition, what intrigued me was the fact that you could actually almost transcribe human physiology in the form of computer equations. And that really sort of intrigued me. I've been in the venture capital business since the 1980s. And I've seen the waves, the PC wave, the internet wave, the mobility wave, the cloud computing wave. And I really had the pleasure of seeing how many parts of the world, was totally revolutionized by digital technology and by computing power. What struck me though is that the single thing which everything sort of like pivots around or centers around is the human. And the human is not linked into that digital revolution. And I had this sort of wacky idea that maybe if one can get a way to develop an electronic interface between the human and some of these very sophisticated, capable digital programs and softwares, that one will actually take it to a total next level in terms of efficiency, in terms of power, and because at this stage the humans are largely engaged and interacting with these systems via keyboards and talk, etc. But there's a lot being said by your body as a sensor, and which could actually provide real-time feedback into these loops, and which could make it, of course, much more powerful. This is all subject to your consent. Of course, you have to be your privacy is very, very important to us. But I just had that idea, and I told them, well, maybe there is a place for taking this capable technology if one can find evolve wearables. At that time, by the way, there was no such thing as a smartwatch.
For a layman thinking, oh well, my watch does that, doesn't it, or my phone?
Interesting thing to think about the watch. It is a little bit like a small brain on your arm, which actually sense things which your brain would not sense. So, for instance, the solutions which we released is one which actually detect COVID-19 infection earlier. And usually your brain detects the infection when you feel you don't feel well, you have temperature, etc., and you feel the symptoms. But actually, the COVID molecule or virus actually infect your body and impact on your body much earlier than that. And there are already small, responses in your body due to your immune response. And you would not sense that yet as a symptom, but with smart technology, we can pick it up. And therefore, in this case, this is a good example of the power of digital capability. Then we can actually, during that 48 hours of viral shedding, which is the most dangerous part of COVID, we can actually alert a person and say, well, you potentially have COVID, and we would recommend you to rather stay at home for another 2 days or stay away from your friend for 2 days and see whether you develop symptoms. That's when your brain take over from this brain. And I think at that time, you can then take a decision. So that just shows you a very good example of using wearables.
Been working, I believe, with Samsung on it. So you've basically partnered with a very large global supplier of phones and watches and other devices, correct? I mean, they're all over actually. They're in fridges, they're in everything. So how does that, are you, so when we look at your company, are you the power behind the throne, or because I know you also have a watch and that actually measures very specifically what happens to your blood oxygenation level, so you can manage that better?
That is, for instance, one application. So you're totally right. The different types of biometrics and solutions that one can actually unpack is endless. And this is really what excited me so much about it. I wanted to just mention, for me, it is almost like one sort of provide a continuous electronic dashboard to a human to actually monitor what's happening inside their bodies. Now, if you just think of the analogy, if you drive a car today without a dashboard with all the various things, you'll feel quite uncomfortable in the car. Think about the old cars 100 years ago, which didn't have it. So what this basically does, this technology, it provides you insights. So let's use sleep apnea as an example. So sleep apnea is, of course, a disorder, a sleep breathing disorder, which demonstrates itself by oxygen desaturations in your body. So what you do is, of course, you can monitor sleep apnea by actually spotting these drops. Now, as you know, I think there's lots of different statistics on sleep apnea, but something like 30% of the people in the US are believed to have a degree of sleep apnea, and of course, at least 10% or more actually, quite acute. Now, what this helps you to actually not only determine that quite early on, and therefore, trying to change your behavior to avoid going to need a CPAP machine or something later. And at the same time, if you're under treatment, actually will provide the sleep clinician the ability and eyes on you, so to see whether treatments are actually successful and positive or not.
How I see biometrics is it is allowing people to start almost trying to manage better a future outcome. So a better quality of life by being more proactive around what their body is telling them, which they can't themselves, they're not intuitive enough to understand.
That's correct. And these systems, as you mentioned, are so interlinked. And I think that's one of the things, again, which set LifeQ apart. And that is the fact that we look at the total system, we look at all the different elements. So you refer to the connection between sleep disorders and mental health disorders. So it's quite interesting. If you think of sleep apnea, you will actually find that it actually exacerbates some other sleep disorders as well. So if you really think of some of the major sleep disorders, which is basically insomnia, parasomnias, hypersomnias, and then there's sort of things like circadian rhythm disorders, movement disorders, and sleep breathing disorders, which sleep apnea is one of. Now that actually have a connection to some of the others. So you will actually find that some of your parasomnias and your insomnias, etc., could be even further exacerbated by things like sleep apnea. And that again start linking, if you look at different types of parasomnias and the link to some stress elements in your body, it is actually those links are actually proven in literature very, very vividly. So I think from that point of view, you actually have to give a person a total view on a lot of moving parts. because you have to think about the total system which need to be solved, and therefore it's actually good to have a sort of 360-degree view.
Created your own device and a watch, so you have your own brand in that, but you also partner with companies that have their own. So you seem to be crossing over all the divides. You're not like an Apple that only works with Apple and does with only Apple, right?
Yeah, I think
you seem to be an agnostic platform. Am I correct in saying that?
Our core value proposition is to actually make an impact by being part of the whole wearable revolution in the world. So as opposed to choosing our own device and focusing on a very specific medical disorder, we took a much more difficult route by working with some large companies to enable their devices. And to actually, many of these companies are focused on consumer applications. So what we want to do is to bring on top of it like a health operating system, which can then enable a lot of health solutions, for these different applications on those devices. And I think what is important is that it has to be somewhat normalized, somewhat standardized. And many of the business and clinical partners prefer not to be linked to only a single brand, because humans are, they have choice, they want choice.
A shiny new thing, something better always comes along.
We believe that we had to align with these large companies, and right now we enable millions of devices per annum, and I think this is exactly in line with we can make an impact, by the way, on both developed and developing nations, because there's different value propositions where digital technology could really help overcome some major barriers in these countries.
How is your development driven?
We have to sort of solve the equation from both sides. So if you talk about the consumers, of course, you mentioned previously things like exercise and just general lifestyle. We need to impact on that as well. And I think that's perhaps where we can make quite a big difference. One of the key outputs which our consumer application, which will be released before the end of this year, will have, it will actually open up very specific systems in the consumer's body, like your fitness system, your sleep system, your cardiovascular system, respiratory, musculoskeletal, mental, whatever. And then what we do is we basically have two core metrics there. The one is the health of that system, and the other metric is what you've done in the last 24 hours to positively impact on that system. Now, what's quite interesting, because that now starts tracking towards longevity, because ultimately you can translate any system's health in an age denominator. And then the question is, can you actually, through cause and effect, determine exactly what a person needs to do to actually positively impact on their biological age? With other words, to get biologically, hopefully it's a little bit younger than chronologically. And I think there's a lot of controversy of people talking about using drugs and things for actually achieving that. But I think just applying stresses on human body, like exercise, fasting, as we know, and this type of stresses actually is very much proven in literature to have a strong effect of impacting on epigenetics, which I think is one of the most important things in longevity.
What we're seeing today, what we access today, will merely tell us we've done X, but it doesn't, as you say, it doesn't track it. And I don't get at the end of the month the report that says, wow, Gisele, you did really well this month because your health score actually improved in terms of your maybe your blood pressure or your blood's oxygen saturation levels while you were sleeping. I don't get that. I just get, oh, you did all those wonderful steps and maybe I felt better or I looked better. So, and obviously if I have a chronic illness, and I think that's probably where the key will really be, because we all know that up until you in your 20s and 30s, you're still sort of all doing okay. And when you hit your 40s and all hell starts to break loose, by the time you hit your 50s and 60s, if you haven't taken care of yourself, that's when most people see these dreaded lifestyle issues come into play. And then you're living in a situation where you most likely on medication, you have to be monitored. There are a whole lot of things going on. Of course, the longer you live like that, the worse that even gets. So what you're saying to me is basically a device or some form of record keeping will ultimately be able to feed back to me whether I'm improving or not improving, not against an outside appearance, but more actually internally, whether I'm actually achieving that longevity.
We can actually directly link what you do 2 weeks ago and the impact 2 weeks later, for instance. This big study, the Framingham study being done, which look at life expectancy, in this case against cardiovascular outcomes. And therefore, if you could actually, through the power of technology, see exactly what your exercise or your sleep or your diet, the impact on your heart and on your cardiovascular system, and you can actually quantify it. And Gisele, that's possible. I will be able to tell you if you do this or this in terms of high intensity training, and I can tell you exactly what to do, what the expected impact is in terms of how many biological days you could actually save by moving to that level or applying that specific exercise regime or sleep regime, etc. And it's very clear. I mean, we have that cause and effect data very clear.
How does the data work and the data protection, especially, I mean, you're working across all these different countries now with different rules generally, and some more lax than the others, I think.
This is an extremely important question. So LifeQ regard data the same way as the organ of the body. You own your organs, it's yours, it's nobody else's, you have all the rights, all the decisions. For us, your health data is just another organ of yours, it's yours. And I think whatever has to be done with your consent and to your benefit. And I think hopefully in the recent years that actually balance is busy turning around. That previously, all your health data was owned by the doctor or the hospital or whatever, and right now it becomes more yours. And this is what this technology also enabled. It enabled you to actually start owning and controlling your old data. So our first releases of our product was actually in Europe. And as you know, Europe, of all continents, are very, very data sensitive. So, I mean, GDPR there is an extremely important element. So we had to develop very sophisticated distribution infrastructure to actually connect all the different parties in a way that users have absolute control in terms of what happens with the data, when the data has to be deleted, or, we do offer users, though, if you really think of it, in the consumer space, before you go into the clinical side, think of a flight recorder. So while you're healthy, you sometimes want to record some of your data. So when perhaps, heaven forbid, you get cancer, you have actually some view in terms of the data which you have. So we have that ability, but then there has to be also very strict controls on that. And then on top of that, of course, based again on with user consent, we actually apply what I call surveillance programs, where we look at anomalies. We build a sort of a physiological baseline for you, and we can actually see whether there's very specific anomalies, coming from, relative to that baseline. And based upon that, you can then be prompted to go and see a medical professional or to actually do more advanced screenings. If you can go to the medical professional and say, here's longitudinal data, here's sort of like my data for the last 3 months. Have a look at it. So as opposed to you coming to the doctor and say, I don't feel well, find out what's wrong. You're already so powerful by having that data on your hands.
It's a very competitive industry. I mean, you're not the only company that's investing in the space and looking at the space, and it's great you have this passion, and you identified some very smart techies who had a vision for it. But there must be a lot out there. What do you think is separating, or what do you think separates you from others?
You need to have very, very sophisticated technology to decide exactly when you need to monitor, how long do you need to monitor, and that is being driven by your understanding of physiology, not by your understanding of the device. And that's why the more consumer electronics device-centric companies make use of us, because we actually approach it from the physiological side. And then secondly, we think of it end to end. We think about the application. So if you, for instance, think of blood pressure, which you mentioned as an important sort of like variable or a health information piece to determine various illnesses. But there's sometimes other information now available through the means of our technology, which may make blood pressure just a side issue, not the main issue, because you might just, you may go straight to the problem with food by having actually eyes on some other variables going, addressing that, which the medical profession until now have not had. Now, the one thing which I do want to emphasize is that we're not there to replace the medical profession, but to help them.
What should someone look for in a health device? What do you think are the most important things to look for in a body monitoring device today?
So it's quite interesting. Different people have different sort of approaches, as you just mentioned. There's some people which do not want to know they have a device. They actually only want it to be alerted if something is wrong or whether they want to do something. For the rest, they just want to get on with life. And so for them, if the device could be an ingestible or maybe something which you hide on your arm or put somewhere on your clothing, that will actually be great. For other people, they really like the engagement. They like the challenge to actually do everything, to do something different every day, to impact, as we talked before, on your bio age, to see, can I really sort of change, what can I do to actually sort of, improve myself, to live better, to live more healthier. So there's that bucket of people, and then there's the other bucket of people only tell me when something is wrong.
How far are we away from injectables?
So I think it will still take some time. There's of course a lot, many people say, no, it's the next 5 years or 10 years. Maybe some early adopters, the technology will be available, definitely. The big thing with wearables is battery. And the problem with injectables is it has to be sort of like powered in a different way. And I think, and to get the sort of breadth and width of data which we do to do proper monitoring, I think it's still a while to go for injectables to get there.
This deal that you announced in the press just in this past week, $47 million new investment. Maybe you can just explain and contextualize that for some of our viewers that are really interested in the business behind the health of LifeQ. And then where are you headed?
In terms of the investment, of course, we've raised it. Typical rounds, it's not you close it at date, but sort of it's being raised over a period of time. The application of the money will largely be now to, I think we've made a lot of progress with the enablement of wearable devices. So we will continue to enable more and add more biometrics to the devices. Yes, that will be part of the road going forward. The second one, and is for me the more exciting one, is now the solutions, to actually open up the solutions. The key focus basically is on the individual. I actually want to give the individual a proper dashboard, proper information, and the ability to actually take small incremental decisions. Particularly, we all know that sort of 85% of health expenditure is linked to bad decisions, to chronic diseases at this point in time. Of course, we all know that that genetics play a key role, but there is a lot in the hands of behavior. So you do want to actually empower people to take smarter decisions. And I think for that, it's all about how do you dish it up? How do you actually, motivate them? So you have to have, of course, actionable information. And one of the problems with some of these big data companies do is they want to use big data and machine learning to actually get to ends. The problem is it's not, you can get there, but you use tons of data to personalize, because ultimately you have more than 7 billion people with more than 7 billion different physiologies in the world. And by the way, every week, that same person's physiology is different from the previous week. So how do you actually do that? So you really have to have very smart, models to do that. And I think this is what LifeQ does. So my dream for going forward is that you can actually almost get any view in terms of what's happening in this engine, this body engine, and that you have the ability to be, preventative, to be smart, if you want to be. And for those people which maybe don't care too much about the health during the living, to have better treatment options. And we do want to actually have very low cost devices and very, I have, for instance here, this is a Mont Blanc, which we enable. This is a $1,000 device. This is, then I can show you $20, $30 devices. And by the way, from a health point of view, the outputs ain't that much different. There's a lot of other things which justify the premium cost, etc. But I think ultimately what we want to make sure is just that there's a common denominator in all the devices, almost like what Microsoft did with the PC. They provide Windows and you can do a lot of things on that. And that's where we aim. So we don't want to replace the hardware. We just want to work with the hardware.
Thanks so much for your time, Laurie, and wish you all the best. And as I say, let's chat again in about six months.